Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, George. Good morning, Penny. How are we all?
Good, good.
Morning.
Monday. It feels a bit strange being here on a Monday. We've had 2 short weeks, and now kids are back at school. And even though the COVID situation in Dunedin is not the best still, but the kids are back at school, and feels like, I'm not going to say life's returning to a bit of normality, but there feels like there are more normal elements within life than there were a few weeks ago today.
Right. Public holidays are a confusing thing for someone in self-employed for such a long time as me. But yes, I'm planning shows. So that is like, and I've got a show in about 3 weeks at Q Theatre. So that feels weird. So now I'm going to go back actually into hibernating a little bit because I don't want to catch COVID just before I'm doing a show.
It's true. I think I was with you in this show, Penny, when we were talking to the broadcaster from Gore, who was talking about his guy who ripped off his Facebook account. And when he said, I had a baby coming, I had to make sure I didn't catch COVID or I wouldn't have been allowed in the room. I was like, geez, you think of all these little other things that could be impacted by, like you've just said, you know, the next whatever month or however long your prep time is going to be, you got to make sure you don't get it, or else then you have to cancel it rather than the government cancelling it, or however that works. So,
Totally. Or like catching it like beforehand. Like I've got a friend who's about to go on tour with Arts on Tour, and he just got COVID, but he's outside his time, but now he's so tired, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and I'm paranoid of long COVID. I'm really paranoid of long COVID. So it's like you just don't want to exert yourself after you've had it either. So it's a time.
Yeah.
It's a time.
George wasn't with us on Friday. He was a bit ill, but luckily it wasn't the dirty C word, was it, George?
No, I'm going to have to do those tests again to keep on top of it, I think. Yeah, there's sort of freeing up, or we're going back to school, I guess. There's lectures and stuff at Otago University now in person.
Are they still having masks at university?
For the most part, yeah, but there's been some laxness on that.
I have to say, 2 of my children who are still at school, one's not, but 2 that are at school, both of the schools have said we're not going to enforce masks anymore. And actually, I think it's shocking and a little bit disgusting. And I can see one of the principals is trying to hedge their bets, because she sent out an email the other week saying, "Oh, we're going to encourage mask use." I'm like, you're talking to fucking 12-year-olds.
Exactly.
Like, if you think masks are required, then you shouldn't have dropped the "we're going to enforce mask" mandate. And here in Dunedin, we're still getting about 700, Southern, we're still getting about 700 cases a day, and the yardstick that we should be aiming for is 350 based on the modelling. So we're still kind of double what is considered safe, and these schools have stopped enforcing masks. And I'm like, so guess what's going to happen?
Yeah.
So my kids are pretty much, they know the science, drilled it into them, and they're comfortable wearing masks even if some of their friends aren't. So they will, and even the next couple of weeks, and just 2 more weeks, and then we'll see, reassess.
Yeah. And just hopefully then they don't get shit from people as well, you know.
They probably will. I've told the 12-year-old, as long as she's completely honest with me, like if she comes home and she goes, "Dad, I got really hassled today and I took my mask off for the afternoon," like I'm like, okay, we can now address that, and I know that was a situation. So if you're feeling a bit scratchy in 3 days from now, we can track it back to now, and thanks for telling me. So they won't get in trouble. I've already made it very clear to them, as long as they're open and honest about what's going on, that's the most important thing. So yeah. We'll see it.
Totally.
All right. Now we've got a bunch of stuff going on today, so let's just rip into it, and let's crack into the very first story, which is a story that came out yesterday. I think News Hub broke the story, I believe, and then everyone else sort of followed it on. We're going to have a look at some of the News Hub story in a minute. But basically, we're being told from some data from a couple of academics in Wellington University of Victoria that New Zealand's more fucked than we thought it was. Long story short is the whole world has been banking on this 30 centimeter sea level rise by 2060. But in New Zealand, we're being told that is a lot worse than that, primarily because of us being, the shaky isles, the isles with tectonic plates underneath them, and because of our land movement being so significant. You add the land movement, i.e. downward sinkage, in with the water level risage, then it's a double whammy, and they're talking about potentially as soon as a decade away, we could be seeing these 30 centimeter rises. Let's have a look at what was said on News Hub last night. The first comment is the scientists themselves who did the research, did the study, talking about how shocked they were when they saw the research, I guess the results that they had then found themselves.
I was shocked. I knew it was bad. I mean, I knew we were getting sea level rise. We know that. I've been a climate scientist for 20 years. But I was shocked at how quickly it can happen.
As we were going through it, sort of the surprises just kept coming.
While we've all been getting on with our busy daily lives, changes have been occurring. And in climate change terms, it's happening at light speed.
Like most people, I thought we had more time, but we don't. We literally have a decade or two before you would look at some sort of managed retreat.
So there's the first part of it. And guys, I've got a few clips to play, so you're welcome to jump in at any time. Any thoughts around that to start off with?
I don't know. Just for me, it feels like, we are not people that dwell in thinking about this every day. But for someone who's a climate scientist, it just must be the stressful job to be just focusing on this and knowing everything that's going to be happening. I don't know. This is just this whole thing where we know what has to be done, but no one has the political courage to do it. And as soon as anybody does anything about it, like try and build a bridge over the harbour for bikes, everybody screams and yells. And I'm just so sick of the endless cycle of actually not doing anything in space. It's just like the movie, Don't Look Up. It just feels exactly like that. It's too hard. People aren't spending the money. People complain if people do spend the money. It's an expensive thing to do, to buy like an e-bike or an electric car or something. And so nothing fucking changes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, I look at, if you look at my YouTube feed right now, you probably see 10 reviews of EVs. I would love to get an electric vehicle, but there is the financial element of it at the moment as well, which is totally untenable.
Yeah.
So I wrote a piece like a decade and a half ago talking about what we could do to help climate change. And one of the things was change the messaging at that stage, which was talking about global warming. And if we started talking more about just pollution, like if you tick all the pollution boxes, you tick the climate change boxes pretty much anyway. But at that time, EVs, the early onset of them were like 20% more expensive. The government could have been driving subsidies into them then, making them more affordable, yada, yada, which they are now. But to be honest, $5,000 to $7,000 on a $70,000 vehicle still is out of my reach right now.
Oh, 100%.
So it doesn't make it hugely
Norway did that,
affordable.
didn't they? Yeah, Norway did that, and they've got a huge EV fleet. But Norway makes a lot of money from oil. So, yeah.
I want to go on to the next bit, because the next bit talks a bit about how this is new information, and I guess I want to challenge that a little bit as well. Let's have a listen to the next part of the conversation from News Hub, and them talking about how the information was released yesterday.
But until now, there's one factor that hasn't been included in the calculations: vertical land movement. We know New Zealand has a dynamic coastline. It can move up and down in a dramatic way in an instant, like we saw with the Kaikoura earthquake. But there are also constant tiny movements, just millimetres a year. It might not sound like much, but when you include that with sea level rise, it makes a massive difference. That's why parts of New Zealand will experience 2 to 3 times the global average of sea level rise. And we didn't know that until today.
When you weave that in with the ice sheets melting, the glaciers melting, and the global ocean rising, in some places, it happens twice as fast. We get twice as much sea level rise than we expected.
I want to just challenge that a little bit, and this is where I actually I'm not trying to be negative about the conversation, but I do want to tie it back to government and local body responsibility here as well, and what we could do. So here's this, and I know this because I was doing a product for ODT at the time, called ODTV, and we talked about this. I don't know how someone, I mean, fair enough that the reporter is saying we didn't know this till today, but how the scientists, this is exactly the same story from 2016.
Yeah.
Like literally exactly the same story. If you want me to read it, it says the threat posed by sea level rise in South Dunedin may be worse than we thought, as new data suggests parts of the low-lying suburb could be sinking. It goes on to talk about reclaimed land. It goes on to talk about how it's dropping between 2 and 5 millimeters a year, and then it goes on to talk about the findings came on top of mounting concern about sea level rise and rising groundwater in South Dunedin. This is not a new story.
Yep.
This is not a new story. This might be a new angle that it's nationwide.
Yeah,
but this
maybe.
is not a new story. And I want to come back, I guess, to that conversation around what government and local bodies are doing, because we've been talking about this in the public sphere. Well, I've been talking about this for 15 years, and I'm sure it's been talked about amongst scientists and academics for a lot longer than that. But for 15 years, they haven't been doing anything. 6 years ago, when this exact conversation was had in Dunedin. Now, fair enough, a reporter doesn't know that this conversation was had in Dunedin, but if this happens in Dunedin, I would think that the science world would go, now that's happening in a major metro. I wonder if it's happening elsewhere in the city, in the country.
It must be happening on the Ring of Fire, right? Like in the world.
Yeah.
We're not the only earthquake-prone place. This must be something that's happening everywhere. But I was thinking yesterday, you might be, I don't know, you're about the same age as me. How old are you?
48.
Exactly the same age as me. Did you ever used to watch The Good Life?
Yes.
Exactly. That was about sustainable living, exactly, in the 70s.
Yep.
So you know what I mean? Like, and people used to give Prince Charles shit for being a lunatic. But all these people were well ahead of it. But it's all about not wanting to spend the money. Just look at the absolute hysteria that breaks around when you try to build a cycle lane. It's just and the hatred towards cyclists, which I'm on at the moment because my husband is cycling 60 Ks a day. So it's just I just find it incomprehensible, and the rage, and somebody's got to fucking lady up, man up, non-binary up, and get the fuck on with it quietly.
I wonder if you picked this ideal world, like this futuristic world, and went, in an ideal world, what would that look like? And it probably means people with electric vehicles. It probably means more solar, more wind, that kind of thing. I mean, in New Zealand, we have geothermal and we have water, whatever that's called, aqua. So we're pretty good with our renewables on most levels.
Very good with our renewable energy, yeah.
But I guess my question would be, if it was that in every garage there was an EV, is that not then government responsibility / policy to go, how do we achieve that in the next 5 years?
But also, public transport is the thing that we're most lacking. I lived in London for nearly 3 years. I didn't drive a car once in 3 years, because they have good public transport.
But it's not possible in New Zealand. I mean, I think that's an unattainable.
Why not? We used to have trains.
Because we don't now, and you can't fit infrastructure back within an already concept. I mean, the reason it works in places like New York and London is because the infrastructure is there and it's below the surface already.
Think about below the surface in Auckland. We're doing it.
But think about Auckland. Auckland is a radial city, right? And you've got the CBD and everything goes out. It's the third largest city by size in the world.
I know.
And to have a public system in there that's going to service everybody like and have people, let's say within 10 or 15 kilometers of the CBD, not need cars like in London. I actually think putting that.
We don't have to aim for the absolute pinnacle of it to make it a lot better than it fucking is right now. Like getting a train to the airport. Toronto only just got a train to the airport, and it makes a huge difference. They halved the price of it, and now everybody uses it. The amount of people that drive to and from the airport when we start flying again is huge. It's just shit like that. And there's land all the way to the airport, so you can't tell me it's about cost. It's about cost.
Yeah, but I agree with you. It's about cost, and I think that possibly providing and I'm not saying no to public transport. I'm saying I think the solution should be erred more on the side of personal transport over public transport, because I think that's more. I mean, public transport in Dunedin's not ever going to be a thing in any big way. We've got a pretty good bus system where we are, but the population versus what you could put in within this infrastructure already is not the solution. Places around the world that are massive, like you can see countries like China and stuff, they build 6-lane highways in each direction, and they build trains in each direction, and then they build the city around it. Fitting infrastructure within a current context is exponentially more. I reckon if you were trying to put tunnels under Auckland, for example, with public transport, I'm not saying right the way to Manukau or whatever, but in that area, you're probably going to be spending more anyway than providing, subsidies for EVs for people to be able to get themselves into a car themselves. But anyway,
That's what everybody said. It's too hard. It's too hard, and here we are. And
But that could be too hard. I mean, I'm not saying that. That the actual public transport thing could be too hard, but there are other solutions.
We have proposals on the ground now, absolutely, for light transport above the ground, for under the ground. It's happening. It just needs to be more ambitious. So we'll have to agree to disagree on that one, because
I just think about low hanging fruit, and I think like the train out to the airport. I mean, I'm completely on board. I'll support it. I'll use it, but that's not going to be the thing that solves the bigger problem. Like, I think the biggest problem is not going to be the loop around central Auckland. It's going to be all the other 5 cities in Auckland that have all their cars and all their areas traveling into Auckland and that kind of thing as well.
But nothing is one thing. Everything is an accumulation. So you've got to approach it from all angles. And also, there's all the shit around lithium, and that's a problem. So with batteries, there's issues around recycling and stuff with that. So EVs aren't even necessarily the panacea. And in countries where they don't have as much renewable energy as we do, they're using coal-fired power plants to power EVs. So what the fuck is that about? You know what I mean?
I think New Zealand is set up to have that kind of EV culture on renewable energy. I agree with you. I had a guy on the other day talking about EVs, and I asked him that same question, because there's that famous Top Gear clip where Jeremy goes, the batteries are made in here, and then they get on a boat and they go to there, and they're dug out there evilly, and then they go to there, and he goes, and I buy my Land Rover from 20 miles down the road. And I asked him about that, and he said, look, the research today is very clear that over the life of a car, they're exponentially, even though there are some of those truths about the batteries, they're exponentially better for the environment than not. Now, I'll take his word at that. I haven't done the research, but I mean, I think the good thing about this is it's something that we need to address and something we need to look at, and it hasn't been up until now. So I guess one of the things I'm saying with this report that we were talking about in 2016 is that we haven't talked about it yet. And so, and I can't see this as being something that anyone other than government can solve, because it's going to involve whether that's local, national, or likely a combination, because it's going to have to be a massive, either including an infrastructure change, but also a policy change, a financial change, and they're the only ones that can do it.
Yeah, but we also have the collective action, right? So you just, I don't know, you seem like you're looking for one silver bullet that's going to fix everything, but we all have to act together and all do things. Like, I've got a compost heap. Woohoo! It's something. My husband, he drove today because then he's pulled a muscle, which is shit. So aging is not useful in the face of climate change. But so he took my car today, and it took him the exact same amount of time, an hour and a quarter, than it takes him to cycle 30 Ks.
Wow.
So, so he takes the decision to cycle. So we all have to have collective responsibility for what we do and how we do it.
Let's have a look at the next clip from this, just to make it very clear. What does sea level rise actually mean? The News Hub story went on to say this.
What that means is the 100-year coastal big storm surge, big coastal flood, they will be happening every year. This place will be in serious trouble.
Yeah. Federal Bay's residents know what's coming for many of the rest of us. They're already feeling the impact.
You really get a sense of the power of the sea, and it can pop into your home and say hello. Liquid Himalayas are coming across the road, slamming into houses and are doing considerable damage.
Those mountain-like waves have forced them into action, lobbying their local council to build bigger seawalls and install early warning systems. But that won't work forever with what's coming, and they know it.
Yeah, so that's the other thing is the realistic thing that government can do and councils can do. I mean, like, places like the Netherlands and stuff that are already below sea level is really a sea. I mean, nature always wins. If you look at down here in Dunedin at St Clair, which is our waterfront, all of the lovely ramps that they built from the water up to the Broadway, they're all gone because the water's just come in and wiped them out. Damaged them enough that if they haven't been wiped out, like massive concrete ramps, they haven't been wiped out, they've been made dangerous enough that the council's then taken them down. Nature always wins, and the way is not to try and hold nature back, but more live with nature.
The thing that might drive everything is the insurance business, of course, because they're not going to insure people that buy houses that close to the shore. So I think absolute beachfront properties are going to become a lot less attractive because they won't be able to be insured.
Well, and this is also the idea of, we've had this conversation before. I mean, they're talking about, they don't use the word retreat. They use a different word than that, which has jumped out of my head, but to kind of basically move away from it. And they're talking about this being this new idea. I had a friend who lived around the Avondale Racecourse probably 20 years ago, whose council bought her house because it was on the 100-year floodplain. So they
Oh,
were
wow.
forced to sell their house 20 years ago. So again, this is not new.
Yeah.
And obviously before the insurance companies say we're not going to insure you anymore, the councils who at some stage have authorized that house to be built there and have okayed it need to step up and buy those properties, and like what they've done in Christchurch after the quake, I guess.
Yeah.
I also thought we might want to have a look very quickly. It's only, I think, 30 seconds or so, or 60 seconds, to the response from the Prime Minister this morning. She was on News Hub on the AM show, and she responded to the research.
Your best
I think
friend.
it just reaffirms for me why it is so important that we do two things. Firstly, that we play our part in making sure that we are reducing our emissions as a nation. That is ultimately why we're seeing these sea level rises, so we need to do our part. The second thing is making sure that we are prepared, not treating it as an inevitability that we will see continual sea level rise, but preparing ourselves. At the moment, we're in the process of working on a national adaptation plan, and also at the same time working on issues around managed retreat. Now, that is a last option in
Managed
many
retreat,
cases,
that was
but we do need to have that level of preparation.
So there you go. So I mean, that's a very quick response from the Prime Minister. Managed retreat. That was the word she talked about.
Stop treating the Green Party like they're freaking, I just hate the way people talk about the Green Party, people talk about James Shaw. It just drives me crazy. These are the people that actually have the longevity of the nation in mind. And yes, and they have these highfalutin things that people go, that's not practical, but something's got to change.
Yep. So I guess we'll see what happens from there. I don't this is what Empress says. There's a public consultation out this month of May on the government's managed retreat policy. So,
right.
Thank you for your comment.
The other thing to point out is that these figures are all based on the worst case scenario of emissions that are above what the government's targets are. But, the targets are quite soon and quite a lot. But that is something to note as well.
I was also wondering that they were like, we were shocked with the results. I'm like, I wonder how, I tried to get one of the guys on this morning, one of the academics who have done it, maybe we can get tomorrow or the next day, to go, how does this actually work? Because if I add into a calculator, 1 + 1 = the result comes out. How do you get a result from the projection? Like, how do you work it out? And how do you know that that's the projection for what's going to be? And just trying to get more of an understanding of how the system works for these projections.
It's all maths. It's all algorithms. It's the same with COVID modeling. It's all that.
Alrighty. Hey, we're going to move on because we want to talk a little bit about, actually, there's a couple of things we want to talk about to do with politics in New Zealand at the moment. And one is the Tauranga election, or by-election, you might want to call it. It wasn't an election, was it? It was more of a candidate selection for a by-election. That's what we were talking about. But we'll start this conversation with a commentary from Today FM from last week with Tova O'Brien. Tova was talking about Christopher Luxon and talking about him and his leadership, and it leads into the second conversation. So let's have a quick listen to this.
Christopher Luxon should have taken a leaf out of, or taken John Key's advice. Another 2 years quietly backbenching away, getting his electorate chops up and better learning the machinations of politics and policy. And Christopher Luxon would have then built up that bit more resilience, preparedness and agility into his brand of leadership. Sir John had long urged Luxon to wait until after the 2023 election, putting money on fair chances that National would lose. Luxon would be anointed the leadership. And after 9 long years of Labour, the 2026 electorate would be ready for change, would be so ready for change, and he would be so ready to rise up to the role of Prime Minister that his chance of a win would be a cinch.
Before we go on, what do you think, Penny? Do you think that's I know where we sit, or you sit politically as well, may not want to see Mr. Luxon as a Prime Minister. That might be your personal belief, but what do you think of the idea of Mr. Key? Because I think it's pretty, I'm not saying they would have won in 2026, but I think waiting a bit longer is a pretty sound idea.
It may be, but it's also so deeply cynical, and it just goes to show, don't you want to make the changes that you want to make in your ideology as soon as possible? Don't you want to win the election so you can enact these things? Or is it, it's just so machinating and stuff like that. And it just sort of irritates me that way. And they were so low in the polls with Judith Collins. Like, the bounce that he has brought is enormous to make them look like an actual viable option compared to the well-dwelling that we had previously. And maybe Simon Bridges would have back up, but everybody hated him for a while there too, because he was he mishandled his PR chops during the beginning of the pandemic. Was so bad. So know, like, I feel like Chris Luxon's actually made them a viable option for certain people, not me, but compared to where they were. So, I mean, I don't know if I actually agree with that anyway. And it just smacks of, it's politics. That's what it is. And that's what I hate about it, that it's about perception and all that rather than actually implementing the changes that you want to. I don't know. Anyway.
So I guess the conversation therefore is an unknown one, but I would then think, based on what you've said, would it have been better for National to get 30% or 35% of this next election under someone like a Judith Collins? Or is it better for them to get 42 or 45% under someone like in my scenario, they're losing both times. They may not, but if losing both times, which is better for the run at 2026? No one knows the answer to that, but I guess that's what they've gone for the latter rather than the former.
I mean, and to me, I think the latter. Like, to me, seeing them as a potential threat for getting in, they feel more viable now. And that's obviously more concerning to me.
I'd be interested to know, maybe George can look this up in the background while we're talking. In New Zealand politics, how many leaders, if any, have lost an election and then came back to win the next one? So, like, if Luxon loses this one, is he done? Or is there history and evidence to say that he can then build up for the following one? Like, I'm pretty sure, I don't know, was Helen Clark in charge in 96 and lost and then won in 99? I don't know.
I think maybe she, I don't know. But that was just when I was coming into politics as a thinking about it all. But, and the thing is too, and that's stupid, isn't it? I mean, that's such perception, but if you've been through it all, especially, it depends. If he is perfectly fine, whatever. But if he's terrible, then yes. But it just is so, as soon as somebody falters slightly, throw them away and get a new one. And who the hell?
Well, speaking of terrible, I'm putting parentheses around that. Let's go on with this conversation of Tove O'Brien and her commentary on Mr. Luxon.
To make the plan even more tantalising was the gift presented by Simon Bridges, a man who had the leadership experience, had nothing to lose, and who could bridge the gap between Judith Collins' self-implosion and come what may election night 2023. But instead, Luxon, the lover of leadership, couldn't resist. He stuck it to Bridges, did the numbers, played the game and won the leadership. Now, after a string of missteps and miscommunication, you got to wonder, did he go too soon? Does Christopher Luxon lack the political experience to pull this off and become Prime Minister? The last couple of weeks have been gaff city for Luxon. Let's take a quick look back. On diversity, talking up a big game about the need for Māori voices in National. Here he is on Te Ao with Moana Maniapoto.
The National Party in general, frankly, doesn't have enough diversity and enough of a Māori voice within it.
And yet, Today FM understands all the possible by-election candidates to replace Simon Bridges in Tauranga are Pākehā men, leaving National with just two Māori MPs in its caucus of 33. Would you be pretty disappointed if there were no Māori candidates in the mix and no women candidates in the mix?
Well, look, what I'd say is the by-elections are slightly different because it comes at short notice.
Go, Penny. I can see you chomping. Get in there.
Oh, I just, I'm genuinely astonished by this. The fact that they put those 4 identical looking men up there after saying that they were interested in diversity. And then this guy from the National Party in Tauranga saying, well, other parties make the decision from Wellington, but we care about the locals and what they think. And I think I read somewhere that 34% of the Tauranga electorate are Pākehā male, 34. So that's not, yes, it's a big chunk, but it's not everybody. And the fact that they just haven't got anybody that reflects anybody else is just astonishing to me. And I just think this was such poor decision making when they've been talking all this shit that obviously doesn't mean shit. So that's what I think.
This was part, we're not going to play this, but this was part of the interview we gave News Hub. Christopher Luxon, absolutely a feminist, wants more diversity and inclusion in National, quoted to say, National leader Christopher Luxon said he is absolutely a feminist and is calling for a lot more diversity and inclusion in his party. And then, of course, we skip to the candidates in Tauranga. And me and George were talking about this before the thing. There is a bit of diversity. I mean, he's got a brown belt on.
Yeah.
And he's got no belt on.
Yeah.
You'd have to say he's a bit older. He's a bit better. He's a bit shorter. So they can tick some diversity boxes. Maybe not all of them, but there are some.
Somebody on Twitter put up that picture and said, "Who are these people? Wrong answers only." And I put up a Rosine colour chart of 4 different whites. That's how I felt about it. It was just like, and there is nothing wrong with being white, obviously, but you can it is astonishes me that this is such a tone-deaf response to a call for diversity. And how do you encourage more people to get in? This is the thing. It's about encouraging people into politics, about encouraging people with alternative voices to stand up and say something and to be involved.
It's horse shit, the thing about, a by-election, you don't have much time. It's like, actually, if you want to put diversity in,
you make
the time to do it. I mean, female.
Yeah.
Crazy as that sounds, like amongst the four.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know some people will cringe at the idea of diversity being kind of crowbarred in, but he's actively saying we want to have a better represented party. And then what they do is they don't use an opportunity to have a better represented party to have a better represented party. So that's it. Yeah. Right. Let's play a bit more Tova. That's right. Play a bit more Tova.
Oh, all right. Sorry.
Because she went on to talk more about his leadership, and she went on to talk about just in this short time frame some of his policy U-turns.
The review into mega churches, which he agreed to on the show and then swiftly reneged on, musing over cancelling Labor Day, which he also quickly thought better of. The public transport gap, saying no, the government shouldn't subsidise public transport, then realising that actually National does support some subsidies, always has. Then on the Māori Health Authority, I've actually just lost track of whether it's been cut under National or not. Sometimes Luxon even flip-flops within seconds. Here he is axing the public sector pay freeze on our show yesterday.
I think we would. I mean, I think the reality is we'd want to be making sure we're making sure people are well rewarded.
Before unaxing it, just 8 seconds later. So you would lift the public service pay freeze with immediate effect if you win the election?
No, I'm not committing to that. I'm not committing to that.
He was also forced to concede on Q&A that his tax cuts are inflationary.
It's no more inflationary than Grant Robertson's $6 billion.
So it's the same. It's still inflationary.
Exactly the same.
So there you go. There's just some. So I mean, because I did want to have this conversation around Tauranga and the by-election, but quickly as I did it, I thought actually it potentially is reflective of Christopher Luxon's leadership. So I thought that's more of an angle to get in and talk about. That's a byproduct of his leadership as opposed to being the story itself. Go, Penny.
But I would like to say that that's such a typical fucking media spin there. She said that he flip-flopped. She asked 2 different questions. She said, would you immediately do this if you got elected? Which is not what he said that he would do. So I'm sorry. Yes, it is slightly. But, you don't know until you get into fucking government. You get the books to see what you're going to do. So anyway, that to me is a typical media misrepresentation of what he actually
So you've just set up our next, but absolutely perfectly move, Ashton, because we have been talking a bit about Mr. Luxon. I just say George knew it. I'm saying he didn't. Let's give him his credit. He's not saying that he looked it up. He said, "Woohoo! I do know things." Clark did lose the 96 election.
It was me. I said that.
Was it you?
I said because I said I think she did lose the election, and she did.
Okay. So Clark lost the 96 election after becoming leader right after the 93 election. So there you go. We've been talking about Mr. Luxon a little bit in this show, and we've been talking about things like being held accountable for what he's been saying. So an example is, rents have gone up by $50 a week. Reporter goes, so what would your government, if you were in, reduce them by? Oh, I can't answer that question. Or things like, tax breaks. You would get an $18,000 tax break. I don't need it. So he's been putting, it feels like, his foot in it with some. He's been talking about policy in a specific way, like putting numbers to things, and then when being called on it, he's been going to that, well, we don't have that policy done yet. Now, actually, we don't have that policy done yet is fine, but we've been saying if you're going to call upon it in a specific way, you need to have then answer to the next follow-up. And I wanted to show something that happened this morning, which is the Prime Minister talking to Simon Bridge, to the AM show.
Ryan Bridge.
And I kind of wanted to do this as a way to, this is how you answer a question as a leader. Now, like her or not, fine. But as a leader, this is how you answer a question without answering a question and pointing to, we don't know that yet. I'm not saying that in a deriding way of her, because he's been saying, this is terrible. What are you going to do about it? We don't know that yet. Whereas she's just saying, we don't know that yet. That's the difference. Ryan's wanting the Prime Minister to commit to tax policies for after the next election.
Let's talk about tax. David Parker, my old mate David Parker, your revenue minister, was on our show on Friday, and he said there are many, many ways to have a fairer tax system. He mentioned the potential for a capital gains tax, a stamp duty, a wealth tax, a deemed income tax.
He's also, of course, said that we're sticking to our policy of no new taxes this term.
Yeah. So that's what I want to talk about. going into the election next year. It's entirely possible. I just want to get a steer on what's on and off the
The
table.
only reason I'm laughing is because, of course, we haven't prepared our tax policy for the next election yet.
But
So this is going to be a fairly short line of questioning.
But you've ruled out a capital gains tax while you're leader.
Yes,
that stands.
Yes.
The wealth tax being ruled out while you're leader.
I'm not going to, Ryan.
No, so that stands.
Ryan, you're asking me to project beyond into the next election and beyond, and I'm not going to do that. We haven't formulated our tax policy for the 2023 election.
Anyway, this part of the conversation goes on for a few minutes, but I saw it as an example. Forget who it is and forget what they're doing, as a political leader being able to actually go, we don't have that data yet. I'm not going to answer the question without any waffle, I guess is what I'm saying.
And if she did change her mind, she'd be accused of flip-flopping, even though to change your mind in government isn't necessarily a bad thing when you're faced with different freaking evidence. I so hate all the binaries, all the it's black, it's white, it's this, it's that. So yeah, I think she did a good job there indeed. And I'm sick of Luxon going on about shit that's clearly happening the world over, cherry picking which country he wants to compare ourselves to, saying that the government's been so terrible with their spending, but what would you cut? I don't know. Stuff like that. Yes. So making assertions without backing it up is frustrating, which I think is different to changing your mind around certain things.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated in where they're going to go from here, because, like I said, the way to get diversity in your party is to put diversity in your party. Yep. So we need that to happen. We meaning if you're going to do what you're going to do, then do it. Yep. The first opportunity you had to do it, you didn't do it. Yeah. So it'll be fascinating to see what happens.
And you just look at their party meetings and things like that, and it's like there are people out there, I am sure, who are centre right, who are of, all different. I mean, for example, I think many people from India, there's quite a lot of right-wing people leaning from India. I don't want to, this sounds terrible. Now I'm getting myself into some sort of stereotyping situation. But there's people in all cultures who lean both ways. So you cannot tell me there's somebody out there that doesn't share your values as a whole who wants to be involved because you haven't sought out to reach out to them.
Yeah. All right. Hey, listen, I'm just sorry. I'm just also messaging someone at the same time.
Right.
Because I'm a terrible human being and forgot to message Robert Patman this morning with the link to the show. So we've just done that. That's all done now. We'll have Robert up in 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. So I thought between now and Robert, I really want to put something out there, some more politics out there, because with Robert, we are going to be talking a bit about the left versus the right in the US and how it's relating to where they are now versus where they were. So over the weekend was the Correspondents dinner. Now, I know for a lot of people, they think this is a bit of a waste of time and people aren't really into it. And they don't, they're not about what this is all about. But I think there was I have to say, President Biden's got some pretty good writers. Let me just leave it at that. President Biden's got some really good writers. Let's play a little bit of the audio and video as to what he had to say. This is basically a roast for people who don't know what this is. This is a roast of so the press gets up and roasts the president gets up and roasts the press. That's pretty much what it is. Let's just listen to a 60 to 90 seconds of what he had to say about the press in this short piece.
This is the first time the president attended this dinner in 6 years. It's understandable. We had a horrible plague followed by 2 years of COVID.
That's a good joke. That is a good joke.
Yeah.
Just imagine if my predecessor came to this dinner this year. Now that would really have been a real coup if that occurred. Tonight, we come here to answer a very important question in everybody's mind. Why in hell are we still doing this? I know there are questions about whether we should gather here tonight because of COVID. Well, we're here to show the country that we're getting through this pandemic. Plus, everyone had to prove they were fully vaccinated and boosted. So if you're at home watching this and you're wondering how to do that, just contact your favorite Fox News reporter. They're all here, vaccinated and boosted, all of them.
After the waving.
So that's a pretty good. That's the Fox. I think that's Younger Ducey there, whatever his name is. Yeah. So there's some pretty good zingers in there. by the prayers. I mean, basically calling out Fox News with a joke for being hypocrites around their vaccine propaganda. And actually, that one about the 2 years and then COVID was actually a very funny joke. So love it or hate it, think it's a waste of time or not. And I know some people think it's a waste of time, but he's got some good writers, if nothing else.
There's a lot of large gatherings that could be deemed a waste of time. So, like the Met Gala, what's that? That's about fashion, there's a lot of money spent but people love it. So do it, whatever.
Let's have a look at a little bit more of it. And after that, we get back. Well, I'm assuming we'll hopefully have Robert Patman joining us. But Trevor Noah was the host. And of course, it's probably you experienced this as well, Penny. It's fair to say that mostly within the comedic world, there are more left-wing comedians than right-wing. Sometimes it's quite hard to have a right-wing comedian. I've done that by trying to set up programs where we have both. So as a left-wing comedian, he kind of took the piss out of everybody, but he did point his guns pretty clearly at the right as well. We'll just have a listen to a little bit of the Trevor Noah commentary as well.
You guys are relentless. Every day you show up and every day you demand answers on the pressing issues of the day. And then Fox News asks about Hunter Biden. And I'll be honest, though, I actually think that's a good thing. I really do. I think people need to be held accountable if they're using their dad's name to get ahead in life. And I can't think of anyone better to ask about that than Peter Doocy. And yes, I know a lot of you are worried. And yes, it is risky making jokes these days. I mean, we all saw what happened at the Oscars. I've actually been a little bit worried about tonight. I won't lie. I was like, what if I make like a really mean joke, about like Kellyanne Conway? And then her husband rushes up on the stage and thanks me. Has led the country through some really dark times since he took office. The COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the launch of CNN Plus. And don't forget, he's also had some major legislative successes. In his first year in office, I might add. He got a bipartisan infrastructure bill passed that would do everything from fixing America's roads and bridges to modernizing school buses, which Matt Gaetz' girlfriend is very excited about. What I like about Ron DeSantis is like, if Trump was the original Terminator, DeSantis is like the T-1000. You're smarter than him. You're slicker than him. You can walk down ramps. Yeah. Because you see, Trump said he won the election, but everyone was just able to look at the numbers and see that he was wrong. That's why Ron DeSantis is one step ahead. First, you ban the math textbooks. Then nobody knows how to count the votes. Boom! My man!
With a little bit of Eddie Murphy laughing there at the end. So, yeah, I mean, as you say, many gatherings are a waste of time, but it was a pretty interesting look. And I haven't seen the whole thing. We're already getting people who have seen the whole thing coming in and saying Trevor Noah's introduction as MC was much better. I'm assuming the bit that we just played there, I got that obviously clipped off someone else, was the actual part of his introduction. So yeah, interesting time. Also, I think we don't really have anything like that in New Zealand, do we? I mean, comedians make jokes about, like you do that 7 days thing where the politician comes on in the chair and they make them say yes or no, but there's not really anything like that, is there?
Yeah, I was on 7 days once, and which we could talk about if we want to, but I don't really want to. But it's like I thought that it was going to be a little more substantive than it ended up being, which was like, isn't Hamilton shit? Isn't Jeremy old? A lot more often than, I actually made a joke in the first episode, I think it got cut out, was talking about Samoa changing sides, how they drive on what side of the road. And I said, we should send Peter Dunn because he's really good at changing sides. And then I said, but he usually goes from left to right rather than from right to left. And then that got cut out and I was told that it might be a bit clever. So
really?
Yeah.
Those words were used, it was too clever, meaning what, the audience wouldn't understand?
I don't know. But that's not really where 7 days was pitching. So I think it's a shame that we don't have something like that. And maybe there's a little show that's happening right now that could fill that gap.
I have to say, it's completely off topic now, but just as we wait for Robert to come on, I was involved with potentially being in a reality TV show probably in the mid-90s, mid to late 90s, Flatmates. Fly on the wall thing, Flatmates. Wow. So I applied for it, and they were quite interested in me because I had this sort of religious background and that kind of stuff, and it would be honest. And without just so people understand how reality TV works and what happens, I'm not saying they intimated this. They literally said to me, "You're two together for this show."
Wow.
So in other words, I wasn't enough of a mess, or I wasn't enough of a, which I kind of disagree with, to be honest, but I wasn't enough of a lunatic or fringe or mean or emotional or whatever. I wasn't enough of that to make reality television.
I
They
mean, yeah,
wanted messes.
that's why I hated Married at First Sight. Like, I watched a couple of episodes. They asked me to be a celebrant on it, and I was like, no, I actually really enjoy the institution of marriage. They chose people to be on there, and they did things like married one person that didn't want kids to someone that did want kids. And I'm like, this is reprehensible behavior, actually. And that, yeah, a lot of reality television is that. So, yeah, that's why I prefer things like, even though then they create villains even in talent ones like Drag Race. I love Drag Race and ones that involve talent, but then the way they edit people into being villains aren't necessarily, when that can involve death threats like it does with Drag Race, I find reprehensible as well.
I educate my kids often on that, and something will happen, and I go, yeah, but you don't know the editing. And they go, what do you mean? And I said, well, let's look at this. And I can't remember what it was, but we're looking at something the other day, and there was two camera angles. There was the one in front, and there was one over the shoulder. And what you saw was all the ones in front, the person over the shoulder had their arms folded like this, and then all the ones from the other side, they had them down at their side. And it went, whoop, 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 whoop. So I said, it's either different conversations or they're editing two conversations together. You can see that by the moving of the arms between clips backwards and forwards. And it's always good. It was revealed when Survivor finally acknowledged that they refilmed some of their stunts to take the cameraman out. So those high shots above when they're doing swimming things, they're reshot. They're reshot because if you look carefully, there's no cameraman in the water. And when they show the up close shots, the cameramen are there as they go around the buoy back to the thing. And they finally admitted it. And that was like, let's pull the sticker off. And now it's all done that. Anyway, speaking of pulling the plaster off, and speaking of what we don't really know what's edited, maybe we should talk about politics. I don't know. It's
We've hardly talked about it at all.
Let's bring on Professor Robert Patman. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. And my apologies for being so late on the way to connect. I've already said on air how much of a terrible human being I am.
Oh, well, I don't believe that, Pat.
Thank you for joining us. Now, I spoke to Robert over the weekend and last week about talking about this, and we had to kind of nut out how we were going to talk about this and what we were going to talk about. See, I'm quite interested in talking about a topic that I sort of talked about last week a little bit, but I wanted to get some other input into it. I did kind of a solo piece about it. And it's based around this idea that Elon Musk tweeted out. Now, I don't feel the need to talk about Elon Musk and what he's saying about himself, because I think this is something that we hear a lot. When I did the piece on Friday, I talked about Senator or Congressman Kasich and how he has publicly said, I didn't leave the Republican Party left me. How we hear people in New Zealand saying things like, well, Labour used to be the party for the worker. Now it's not. Now, I'm not saying any of these are accurate. I'm just saying we hear this a lot. And we hear people saying the left has gone way woke or way left or way identity politics, whatever you want to do. And we hear about people saying about the right going, Trumpian, way to the right. And that's sort of what I wanted to talk about. And I think your expertise as an expert in international politics, Robert, might enable us to talk about this from the American perspective, because I think that's where you see it most clearly. In fact, I did a piece last week where I kind of said, after looking at what the Republicans are doing right now, what they have done and what they are doing, makes me kind of grateful for our national party a little bit, because even though that's not necessarily where I sit personally, it's nothing like what you're seeing the right doing around the world. So that's a bit of a long introduction to say, we're kind of talking about this sort of nebulous thing, Robert, but I just want to throw it to you, and you can start us off and add to that, and we'll go from there. What do you think about this idea of the left going further left, the right going further right, and a bunch of people who were left in the center, or perhaps they were center left, like this tweet saying, now being talked about as being right wing, or maybe if they're John Kasich, they're now talking about being liberal because they haven't followed the Trumpians to the right.
Yeah, I mean, I think these developments, the polarization of the United States, and to some degree the polarization of a number of other countries in Europe, is linked to the rise of the social media in the last 15 years or so. This is a revolutionary change that we've seen, where, in a sense, the mainstream media, particularly in the United States, has found itself bypassed to some degree, with lots of people getting their news from Facebook, Twitter, and other. And of course, anyone could basically. There's been attempts by after the Christchurch terror atrocity. There's the Christchurch Call, an initiative led by the Prime Minister and also President Macron, to try to curb online extremism. But there's no doubt about it. A lot of people behave in the social media in a way they would never dream of in face-to-face dialogue, like we're engaging in now. But they would say, and I think we've all been on the receiving end of it as well. People who make really unfair and gratuitously rude and intolerant remarks about one, and I think that's contributed to a climate that some politicians have seen an opportunity, and I think Donald Trump saw an opportunity. So I think one thing that's probably fueled this has been the social media. Now, look, I'm a great fan of the social media. There's some wonderful people in there. There's some brilliant commentary. It's a wonderful source of information. I'm just saying, I think that may be, Pat, there may be the potential for a downside there. That the technology has actually empowered people who have quite extreme views. And I think it may have had an effect of polarizing societies. The second thing here is it's not just down to the social media. I think also there has been disappointment with the liberal dream. There was the 2008 financial crisis, 2009. In New Zealand, we were sometimes puzzled by, we were affected by it, but not in any way like the United States, where 1 in 4 people lost their, I think it was 1 in 4 people saw the value of the mortgage exceed the value of their house. It was an extraordinarily traumatic time in the United States. And if we're trying to look at, the origins of this polarization that we're alluding to, then perhaps those developments are linked to it. But yeah, I mean, to me, it was epitomized, this polarization, most graphically when there were 47 members of the Republican Party in the United States actually opposed an investigation into the circumstances which led to the insurrection in the United States, which, on Capitol Hill in January 2021, which led to the death of 8 people. I was just astonished that, putting aside, they could not put aside politics to actually investigate actions which were criminal. So, yeah, I think it's very pronounced. I think ultimately political leadership is the key to healing some of these divisions, but it's going to take, for many politicians, I think, once the society is divided, there's a temptation to exploit perceived grievances and build your political, career that way. For example, Ted Cruz has just applauded the takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk as a tremendous breakthrough for free speech in the United States, and I find it disquieting. And I'm glad you mentioned about New Zealand, because I think the United States has seen its position as a role model for democracy substantially decline, as seen through other democracies. And I think we should try to hold on what's working here, and not simply, at one stage, America was always the sort of, the model to be emulated. At least that was the perception. If it doesn't happen in America, it doesn't happen in the world, sort of thing. I think those days are over now. And I think that, New Zealand has a lot to be, without being complacent. Democracy is always a work in progress, but I think we've got a far less divided society than many others. Although we saw with the protests in Wellington that a lot of people are affected by the social media, and people are operating in parallel universes. and they don't have the same facts.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, so that's sort of like seems to me to be a reaction if social media is stoking it and stuff to actual fake news. Do you know what I mean? Like people actually falling for things and then leaders being opportunistic indeed. Like to me, I've always said Donald Trump has paid for a lot of abortions in his life, I'm pretty sure. And then to him be there, you know, who stacked that Supreme Court in a way that is so detrimental to the health of women because of his opportunism is so disgusting to me. And I just find it reprehensible that way.
I agree with you, Penny. It's cynical, and it's just, if you like, self-advancement. Looking at the landscape, saying, "How can I advance?" Oh, you know, fake news is a good line. I always get worried when politicians blame the media. We've had one or two politicians in this country who scapegoat the media, and my alarm bells always go off because the media is like any other profession. There are good and bad people in it. But by and large, the job they do is really important in a democracy, which is to convey information. Sometimes that information can be inconvenient for certain politicians, and it's very good that information continues to be conveyed because we're not there to create a comfort zone for politicians. And all dictators, of course, or authoritarian leaders, one of the first things they do is manipulate and control the media.
Yeah. One thing I will say is I get frustrated because the media is a victim of this all as well, right? Because clickbait drives their incomes. And so then they're more inclined to promote things that are more inflammatory rather than using reasoned political discourse and analysis. And so then that fuels all of that. And then it's just this cycle as well. So I don't think the media is completely, you know, innocent in all of this. But yes, as soon as anybody moves to stifle the media, then I'll be right at the front saying that as well. But I think it's complicated with all of that.
Let me jump in here before we jump back in, Robert, because I hadn't queued this. I haven't queued this up to play it, so I might be up by a second or two. So bear with me. But something that you said, Robert, and also now what you guys are talking about to do with the media, I also want to know though, and maybe this is more of a question for a psychologist, is that when the media demonstrate clearly what's going on, we still don't believe them. There is a candidate in the US at the moment who has flip-flopped so much, who has changed his position so much, it looks like a different person who is now trying to get elected versus who was talking about Trump. I'll play you a little bit if you haven't seen it, and you'll see what I mean. This is the same person.
Myself, the elites were right about it. As somebody who doesn't like Trump, myself, the elites were right about Donald Trump, right? I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
He's the best president of my lifetime, and he revealed the corruption in this country like nobody else.
I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place. I think that he was a good president. I think he made a lot of good decisions for people.
I take it you're not a Trump supporter from what I've read. Am I right? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. I didn't vote for Trump.
All around, he was a great president. I'm 37 years old. Certainly the best president of my lifetime.
Wow.
There you go. So when you've got these people who are then actually, you're talking about the media and the role the media has got to play. When the media shows literally exactly the bullshit that's going on, still doesn't seem to resonate.
No, that's true. But, you know, lying can work. I mean, we've got a lot of politicians at the moment who do not value, I don't mean false consistency, but they're not moored by a certain set of values. And they're just opportunists. They like the attention that a political job gives them. And, you know, J.D. Vance's position is probably more widespread than we find. If you're ambitious, as he clearly is, and he wants to do well in the Republican Party, and Donald Trump is the kingmaker at the moment in the Republican Party, he's doing what's necessary to get that Senate seat. If he comes out against Trump, that could really complicate him. It might boost his public standing amongst those Republicans, and there are quite a few of them who don't like Trump. But from his point of view, that's a long-term project, and he's not interested. So, you know, the worry I have actually about this is that we were speaking about democracy. I think one area where democracy needs to improve itself, if I may say so, and I think I've always taken the view that democracy is a work in progress. It's never the finished product. And one area we need to really think about globally and nationally is who controls the media. Should rich people who happen to be rich, one of the things I find ironical is that since the 1990s, where we have the fantastic technical ability through this information and digital revolution to disseminate information in a way we've never done before historically. So we can literally now put news around the planet and images almost in real time. And that's an incredible thing, and it's new. But the irony is that since this process has gathered momentum, the advent of social media we've just referred to, the ownership of the major media outlets has become concentrated in ever fewer hands.
Yeah.
So we now have Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. They're all in the top 13 richest people in the world. They basically are controlling a lot of the media. And I think that's unhealthy in a democracy. I do not think, for example, in a democracy, a person should own more than one newspaper. I never understood why Rupert Murdoch was allowed to take on American citizenship to extend his control. After all, if you really believe in free competition, I actually do, then you want diversity and ownership.
Yeah. And I think that's part of why it's not as polarized in New Zealand, because we haven't had News Corp or anybody like that in our media landscape, because they did own something briefly in early 2000s or something, and they've been out ever since. And I think that totally shows. And obviously social media stokes division, but because we have generally, do you know what I mean? Like, it's so funny. The left goes on about how right-wing the media is, and then the right goes on about how left-wing the media is. But I actually do think that there is a balance between them all. And I think that's helped because we don't have any interests like that.
But I do think that, the technology has actually got ahead of the rules governing the need for diversity and balance. And I think that this is a really big issue in democracy. I mean, Carol Coldwalder, who a wonderful journalist for The Guardian, has made the point, and I think it's a fair point, that given the changes in technology in the distribution of information, we seriously need to reconsider how we conduct fair and free elections in this context. And it seems to me that this is an issue that doesn't get a lot of airing in democracy, but you could argue, coming back to my earlier point, there is a tension between some very, a few oligarchs, very rich oligarchs, owning just some of the world's biggest media outlets. And I do think that that's ultimately quite unhealthy. And we really need, in a democracy, to make sure there is a diversity of opinion.
Yeah.
Let me ask one more question, and you can both answer that. I'll answer this as well. The example I just gave of JD Vance, right, flipping like that from one to the other, is sort of almost an exact example of where this conversation began. He is demonstrating moving to the right. Now, I think most of us would think that's not his actual position. I think most of us would think he's playing a role or lying, as Robert said, to get elected. But this idea of moving further to the right is where we started this conversation, or further to the left if you're on the left. I wanted to know from you guys if you thought that is happening. Is, for example, the left in New Zealand, the left in America, the left in general, moving further to the left? Is the right moving further to the right? And if it is does one create more danger, or are there more concerns around one party moving from, let's say, what their traditional base was to where they are now?
Who do you want to start with? Robert.
Well, in the American context, I'm rather baffled about these claims that America's moving to the left. What to me is plain is that the Republicans have basically given up the center ground and gone to the extreme right. I mean, let's be quite clear about this. There are a number of members of the Republican Senate actually supporting Putin in the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And you've got Fox News acting as a cheerleader. I mean, Mr. Putin's the media that supports Putin, the state-controlled media in Russia, carry clips from Fox News, and with approval. This is extraordinary, and to go so far right that Mr. Putin's actions now are viewed with approval as a strongman leader. I just find extraordinary. And admittedly, those may be fringe elements, but it's amazing that there are groups of 8 or 10 Republicans prepared to do that at all. On the left, we've heard that American politics, Ocasio-Cortez is sometimes cited as being on the left, as is Bernie Sanders. But in European terms or New Zealand terms, they're probably social democrats.
Yeah.
They're not asking for nationalization or anything like that. They're basically asking for things like healthcare being a right, not a privilege, and asking for greater security around job employment, things like that. So I'm a bit baffled by those claims.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, like, to me, I know that I am left-wing and therefore biased, but the extreme left is we treat everybody with respect and everybody can eat properly and be warm. And on the right, it's this extreme, difference in income. It's complete erosion of women's rights, like around body autonomy, around women's rights, and things like forcing women to have transvaginal ultrasounds before they're allowed to have an abortion. If they, to not give an abortion exemption for underage rape victims, and that's some sort of victory for the right. I mean, that's what I see. And to me, I am glad that we don't have that here. Like, I think we have a lot of fiscally conservative people, but socially liberal people generally in New Zealand. And when you push back against that in a different way, that does not fly well. Like we just, for the last census, we clicked over into being a more secular society. And we don't like it when religion gets involved in our politics. Like people have an actual reaction to it. Like Christopher Luxon is playing that down, So I think it's in any way the same as it is over there, where I saw a survey and the people trusted atheists less than pedophiles in America. Like, this is truly insane. So I'm glad that we don't have that to the same degree completely. And I think that we're getting more and more rights for sort of traditionally underrepresented and marginalized people in New Zealand. So I think that is changing. But yeah, to me, the extreme left just seems like a world where we respect each other.
All right. Hey, Robert, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you giving up some of your time, and then you can go back to do your real job rather than this silliness that we're doing. So thank you, sir. I appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you. All the best. Take care.
Let's have a look also at what Ayrton Foot said. Ayrton, would you say Ayrton? A-O-Y-R? Ayrton? I'd say Ayrton.
I would.
Expanding democracy to all other sectors of society. For example, worker-owned and operated businesses may help with the monopolization of certain sectors like media. Yeah, I mean that's probably what's happening at Stuff, isn't it? Because when you work for Stuff now, after they bought it, don't the people working there have a part ownership in it or something?
I donate to Stuff now. I mean, and the thing is too, the erosion of democracy is so prevalent in America, where they do everything they can to suppress votes, like gerrymandering, all that stuff around, the absolute institutional jailing of Black people, and then they can never vote again. It's just the extent that America goes to repress democracy is really quite something.
Should we bring George back in? George, you want to jump back in to wrap up? Just because you've been off there by yourself for the whole. You been okay? Everything all right? Just haven't seen you for so long, George. It's been so long since we've caught up. Hey, thanks for coming on today, Penny. Yeah, you go, George. Hey, actually, George, do you want to add anything? We've had like 4 things on today. Anything you want to throw out there?
No, that's fine. Another time.
Should we do that as well? Bring my dog back in.
Yeah,
it's got a fidget spinner.
Nala. And that's an antler as well. Hey,
I like. Right, the sound of your voice is white noise for him, and he just goes to sleep. Or her.
Yep, she's my mate. She's my little yeah. Don't misgender my dog, Penny. Fuck, how offensive. I tell you what, it happens though. It's like we had rabbits. We've got rabbits. Had a male dog, a dog rather than a bitch before Nala. And for a long time, every dog was male. And now the rabbits are males, but I call them she all the time because this dog is female. So I can't, it's like you can only handle one sex in your head of pets, I think. And everything becomes that sex no matter what.
Do you know what it is, Pat? It's the uber liberalization. So you've become a feminazi and you just see women everywhere. And that's what it is.
Sounds fun. Wouldn't mind seeing women everywhere.
The Green Party is to blame.
All right, guys. Yeah, George, is there anything else you wanted to throw in there, mate? You were listening to all of that horse shit that we just talked about.
No, I'm all right.
All right, guys. Hey, thank you for being involved, George. Thank you for co-hosting, Penny. I appreciate your time again today. I enjoyed today. It was great. It was good. We got some interesting stuff out there. Robert Patman's always a legend. So thank you, Robert, if you've seen the end of this, for coming on board. And I think we'll wrap up. Remember, #ShareOurShit. You can follow us on Twitter and you can follow the Facebook page. Shall I put that up there for people who are still watching?
Yeah, our shit. That's a new one. Lovely.
Oh, that's what I put on the end of all my tweets about this. #ShareOurShit. Mate, just share our shit, mate. I always, when I do that, like if I've had on someone who's quite, let's say, respected in community in society, and I've talked to them, a few times I've gone, oh, maybe I shouldn't share our shit, because they might want to not retweet it because of that, but I always have, and some have retweeted it and some haven't, because
I'm extremely fucking delicate, so just be careful around me.
Yeah, there we go. Well, this one, that's the other one. Big Hero News, stories of the day. Like, subscribe, and comment. All right, guys. Thanks, guys. Appreciate everyone being involved. Thanks for watching. We will catch you again tomorrow morning from 11 a.m. Thanks, Penny. Thanks, George. Lunchtime.
Indeed.